Hi guys, my name is Christina, welcome to my channel and welcome to yet another episode of this drawing session podcast. Today's episode, as you probably can already tell, is going to be hella long. Today will be one of these episodes where I have no idea what is happening on the screen. It's not my commentary over what I'm drawing. It's going to be independent talking session, basically, from me. And before we get into the topic of this podcast, I'm gonna just tell you that I actually do have a real podcast on all the platforms that you can think of: Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. My podcast is out there. It's called Drawing Session, kind of like the same. And this podcast is more designed to be a podcast. Basically, it's the idea of what I'm doing for my drawing sessions. What I'm doing is I'm creating new videos, new podcast episodes over there. But at the same time, I am kind of taking some topics that I did in a video and elaborating into a major episode of the podcast that is like 40 minutes long, 1 hour long, and I'm talking about this topic. And so I already have 8 episodes out and I keep going strong. I post I just release an episode every Monday. So if you guys are interested in something like this, like you like this video when I'm talking about certain topics, there I will leave a link down below to actually go and listen through the podcast. Actually, I'll be still posting it on YouTube as well, but I think it's more podcastly friendly listening experience on the podcast platforms, but it's up to you. This episode was originally, what I'm going to be talking to you today is originally recorded for that podcast, but I'm plugging it here on YouTube as well. So either or, you can listen to me on YouTube or you can listen to me on the podcast platforms. Anyway, this announcement out of the way, I'm gonna get straight to the topic of this video, and I'm probably gonna do a chatty update podcast with you with the next episode. We will see. But in this case, I'm done with my blabbering. I'm done with my announcements. Let's get to the topic of the actual podcast today. In today's episode, I wanted to talk to you about putting your comic out there, putting your comic online, platforms to use, how to use it, logic about using them, my thoughts, my experiences, all of that good stuff. So before we start, I feel like I need to premise that, I have this personal problem of my own that every time I create any sort of content, when I give some sort of advice, I feel like I'm obligated and I have to have some sort of concrete idea and concrete solution and how to do it type of list to give to people. And I just feel like if you're about to talk about something, you should come prepared and you have to have all the answers. It's my personal issue. I feel like sometimes some topics, they just don't have the solutions that can be, given as a list, or sometimes there is just no good solution overall. Different things work differently for different people. And sometimes this is okay to have more of a conversational approach to how we solve certain problems and how we do certain things. So it's my own challenge to realize that, because I'm hesitant to talk about certain topics because I feel like, I don't have a concrete answer, like super AAA expert opinion that is like just bulletproof, so I better not talk about it at all. So I have to overcome that, because there's definitely a value about discussing different options, and some ideas, some questions, some problems don't have concrete solutions. They have options, ideas of solutions, and we still figure it out within our community as artists. So I feel like this is one of these topics. So that's why I feel like I need to premise this conversation by telling you that this is just my discussion. This is just my experience, my thoughts of this, or just basically what I observed by putting my comic online for many years and just being present online and putting my art online for many years as well. What I'm thinking about it, just my experience, my thoughts, my conclusions, and my ever developing thoughts, because, I'm still putting stuff online. I'm still learning things about it and learning tips and tricks and whatnot. So this is it's open, and it's going to be open-ended conversation. It's basically just going to be a conversation rather than a lecture of how to type of thing. So with this out of the way, let's talk about the subject at hand. So first thing first, putting your stuff out there. And I want to first talk about just the concept of putting your stuff out there and your art out there. I'm a firm believer, if you're creating art, it's meant to be shared with people. I know that a lot of people, they just do certain art, share it with friends or share it with, maybe family or whatnot. And I personally think that art is meant to be shared. Art is meant for other people. This is kind of like the nature of art. This is just my own opinion. So to me, the fact, like the aspect of sharing it and the aspect of putting it out there comes hand in hand with creating art. That's just me. So for me, if you create art, you have to kind of put it out there, who you create it for. There's that. So to me, then I feel like every artist have to consider different ways of how they put their art out there. And first logic, like the first natural question of like putting your art out there is, who is your audience? Who are you creating your art for? Why are you creating your art? What's the purpose? What's the point? Who's your audience? And this already, a lot of artists who start creating art, while like a lot of us already, we consume quite a lot of art, we consume quite a lot of other content, so we naturally will be drawn to some sort of content. And if the content that we create is similar to the content that we consume, then we'll already kind of have an understanding what our audience like is, and it's not such a difficult question. Sometimes, however, it's different. So sometimes what we create is not necessarily what we consume. I feel like for me, it's halfway there, because I do kind of create what I consume, in a sense that I create a fantasy comic and I do consume fantasy content. I definitely like movies that are fantasy. I definitely like books that are fantasy. I do like comics. However, I do not like Western comics. I do like manga. I don't like Western comics like at all. Never cared for the superhero genre especially, and just overall I don't like the inking plus color technique. I don't know, and I don't like the idea of comics created by team. I don't like when artists and the writer, they're different people personally, but we'll talk about more of it later on. So for me specifically, it's kind of like similar in a sense that it's the same genre, but there's definitely differences in the way that the fantasy that I create is not the fantasy that I read. My fantasy has a lot of there's contemporary element in my story. So we have a character who is coming from the world that is real world, like human world, and she comes to the fantasy world, kind of like let's say maybe Chronicles of Narnia type of thing, like Harry Potter type of thing idea. So both worlds kind of exist. So I guess in Japanese term, it's a isekai genre, somebody who comes to another world, but also real world exists as well. Real world might not be a setting in the story, like really important setting, but it exists. So we have this context. So this is the type of story that I create. However, it's not really the type of story that I read. I'm not like, I read Harry Potter when I was a kid, like who didn't, but I never was like a huge fan. Chronicles of Narnia, I read all the books, also didn't like, I was not really a fan. So the fantasy stories that I typically read are the ones that are 100% sent to the fantasy world, where the real world does not exist. You're totally in the present of like a, fantasy world, and that's it. That all context you get. And the ones that I typically read are like just standard medieval fantasy for some reason. I'm not sure why, but I do like just a standard, basic medieval fantasy. I like the stories about friendships more than romance. That's something that I read more about that. And overall, I actually do not consume even that much of content in general. But I definitely do create in a story-wise, like a little bit of different fantasy. And the stories that I like to read, I usually have male main characters. I usually like reading from male's perspective. However, it seems like I'm writing from female perspective a lot. Like I have most of my POV characters are female. I don't know. Maybe I should do some self-analysis on that. I don't know. But As you can see, it's different. And the type of comic that I create, as I said, I don't like full color Western comics. I do love manga as comics medium. But my comic doesn't really look like manga at all. It's full colored, it's full shaded. So yeah, it's kind of like different. So whatever I'm creating visually is completely different from what I'm consuming. So for me, it's kind of like I do know my demographic, but at the same time, I do not necessarily know my demographic. So for me, it was a little bit of search there. So naturally, if for you it's the same, like what you create versus what you read, what you consume is the same. You can already know your demographic already, and knowing your demographic will help you figure out where to post things. So that would be one point to consider. Another point to consider is, what are your plans? Like, what are your plans with the art that you're creating? So with your comic, what do you want to do when you put it out there? Do you want to put it out there so just as many people get their hands on this, so it's exposed to the most amount of people possible? Or you want to put it out there to just, get attention of people, but not necessarily give the whole story to them, not give the whole product to them. And maybe you want to redirect them to, some paid websites or something like this where you can give the whole story. Or maybe you want to pursue some sort of a traditional publishing, some sort of a traditional endeavor. So for you, again, whatever you put out there might be just works in progress or just fragments of it. Depends. It really depends on your strategy or what you want. My personal agenda is I want to get my comic out there to as many people as possible. I want to get as many eyeballs on my comic as possible. So to me, I would not want to hide my comic behind a paywall. I want to make sure my comic is available to anybody, and anybody anywhere can read my comic. So I do have a Patreon, so I do have option for people to kind of contribute to the comic with their money if they want to support the comic, if they want to get like additional content, like extra materials, or if they're gonna get they want to get some privileges. So the privileges that I offer is that people can get some pages of my comic earlier, and overall the comic releases for people earlier, and they can see progress that I'm doing with my comic. They can see sketches, they can see like work in progress pages, like whips of the page overall before it's completely shaded. They can get to vote on the color of characters' eyes and other fun things. But overall, in general, my comic is available to anybody who wants to read my comic for free. So that's my personal objective. So because of this, the platforms that I will be picking will be the most broad-reaching platforms. And I've been on several platforms at this point, and some worked out well, some worked out not really well. So, and some really maybe help started the audience for my comic overall. So I just want to talk, I guess, about my own experience about putting my comic out there. And I was debating how to talk about it. Maybe I thought to maybe talk about categories of different platforms that you can put your comic on, but I feel like it's a little bit confusing because I feel like you guys need to I will have to explain some context basically. So instead, I'm thinking I'm gonna go chronologically. I'm gonna explain how I started posting my comic overall, and different, like the story of me putting my comic out there and how it went. So to begin with, we have to start with DeviantArt, and this is where a lot of things happened. I obviously was putting my art out there on just random platforms that I would find. At that point, I think there was like Facebook was a thing, like it's still a thing obviously now, but I feel like it was a little bit different back then. So I would post things on Facebook mostly, and maybe on some similar platforms surrounding Facebook. It's hard for me to tell at this point. It was so far away in the past, but then it really started from DeviantArt, where one of my friends, she just showed me that there's this website, DeviantArt, that really is made for artists and to post artwork. And there also was a lot of high-profile artists there with huge followings. And overall, back then in DeviantArt, you can get ridiculous amount of followers. A lot of people were there. This is where art was at, and this is where you see not only a lot of artists, but also a lot of people who are interested in consuming arts. And it was kind of coincided, I guess, with the rise of digital art. And because this is a website and those are basically, it was at the same time when I was starting to work digitally. I was drawing all my life, but at this point my favorite media was pencil and pen and paper, like pencil or pen, like basically monochromic things like that. I didn't really like color because like just paint didn't really work for me, so I thought I'm a monochromic type of artist. However, as I discovered digital media, I realized that I really enjoy drawing in color. And I realized that the things I really hated about color work is that the fact that I have to wait for the paint to dry, like the watery aspect of paint or like liquidy aspect of any type of paint really would interfere with my process. So the fact that I have to know, like I have to kind of like submit to some not like submit to techniques, but I have to accept that material itself requires certain techniques to just work with material. So you have to wait for things to dry, for certain how different colors blend on the paper or canvas depending on what colored material are you using. Is it oil paints, is it watercolor? Depending, they have all different rules that are based on how just basically chemistry of the material works. So it was not the same in pencil and not the same especially in pen. In pen you have like literally this is your pen, just this is the paper, just go for it. And I liked it more because I didn't like the limitations that material would put on me. So when I started working digitally, I started to really enjoy color, and I started putting my art on DeviantArt. And for people who are familiar with my work or whatever, or like my YouTube channel, my Instagram, if you guys know, I originally wrote a novel, and my comic was originally a novel. It's a published novel in Russia. So that after I published it, I decided to eventually switch to the comic, and I started creating comic kind of like as a retelling of my novel, because I decided to not do novel anymore. I moved to Canada. I didn't want to write in Russian anymore. I didn't want to do anything for like Russian market anymore. I didn't see the value. So I switched to graphic novel. But before I did switch, so what happened is that I started to realize like I would still draw, like even while I was writing, I was drawing, and more often than not, the subject of my drawing would be my characters or certain scenes from my story, because this is something that was in my head. This is something I wanted to draw. Like this is something that I naturally was interested in drawing. Sometimes I would draw something different just to test myself at drawing different things, but mostly there would be the scenes from my comic, and this is something that I used. This was a subject for my drawing and the subject to me testing digital media. So I would start putting things on DeviantArt, and there was a time on DeviantArt where I started kind of being not like active in the community, but I would really engage with people. I would message, comment, like works. I would be there. So my DeviantArt account started to grow, and it slowly become pretty decent. Like I never got like insane millions and millions of views, but it's pretty decent in size, and I do have good following. I still have, but you know, it's not, doesn't mean that much right now with the DeviantArt situation. But I would, you know, gather people there. It was a decent following and decent activity in my account. So, and people would start to ask, what is that? What are the characters? What are the stories? Because they could understand from the art itself that it has some story behind it. It has some characters. There's something going on. And so people could understand that it's based on some sort of a story. So as I was making decision to switch to comic media or just start a comic media, I literally would be asking my viewers on DeviantArt, what do they think? Would they want to see the comic with these characters? I would tell people that it's actually a novel that is written, but it's written not in English, and I was talking in English on DeviantArt. So most of my audience will not be able to read it. So I was thinking, hey, how about I try and I do a comic out of it? I'll make a first chapter, and let's see. Would you be guys interested to see that or not? And a lot of people who were following my art, because my art would be based on this character, so a lot of these people were naturally interested to see the comic. So this also was the aspect that made me really really legitimately try to do a proper comic. I did it before, it didn't really work out because I couldn't draw that fast. But at this point in time, I was a pretty mature artist, and I knew that I was able. So I started doing that. So naturally, this is where the majority of my original following came from DeviantArt. And because people whoever was consuming my art already, a lot of these people converted to liking my comic, because I also would be posting pages of my comic over there. So first, there is always something that happens when you change the type of the content that you're producing. A lot of people would not be interested in the change of the content, not necessarily because the different content that you provide is something that they don't want, something that they don't like. It's not necessarily even that. It's not that the content is bad, but it's mostly like the purpose. So they were subscribing for your particular content because they wanted certain thing, and now you stop providing this exact certain thing, and they potentially were not ever interested in other type of thing. So it's just something like a comic versus digital art, just pictures, is a kind of different type of the content, especially in art style, because art style kind of a little bit different for the comic. I still like to have very high resolution with a lot of like art style for my comic with a lot of details. However, the level of details will naturally go down for the comic because you have to draw faster for the comic. You have to draw way more material, more content, a lot of drawings. So you have to kind of simplify the style to make it possible, even though I really, really still try to make it as like realistic looking, as well shaded, and, you know, as well detailed as I possibly can. Sometimes I think it's gonna be the death of me, but I'm trying to do that nonetheless. So naturally, some people fell off, some people were not interested. I got some weird comments, but it's okay. A lot of people, they really liked to follow the comic, and I had a pretty decent following over there. And I already kind of, that's why it's not necessarily I started my comic and my comic gained following. It was a natural progression where it kind of combined the fact that I already had, like, it was like a naturally, it was a symbiotic process, basically. I had a following before, and then I created a comic for this following, but also the following itself almost asked me to do the comic. It's like people ask for this material, and I created this material, and it was kind of interesting. Basically, if I didn't have this much following or this much original interest on my standalone art on its own, I might not have seriously considered to start creating a comic. In general, I would probably just continue with the novel format. So this was interesting. This was really wonderful that happened. And from there on, DeviantArt was the main point when I was posting my comic. But how I also created the website for my comic. However, like the comic was still updated. Every time the comic updates, I would post it on DeviantArt. I want to talk specifically about the importance of the website. So as I will be going down the memory lane closer to the modern times, I will be talking about other different platforms and how it worked for me. However, I want to, at this point in time, talk about the importance of the website of the comic. So obviously, internet is a fast evolving thing. What is working for the internet right now might not work for the internet in 2 years. It's just, you have to adapt. If you put anything on the internet, overall, if you try to work with technologies right now, you should be able to change and evolve. But at the same time, so it's kind of interesting. You should be willing and ready to change and evolve with time and with technology as with something that is working better right now. And at the same time, you should know what to commit to, because if you keep jumping between platforms, whatever is more popular right now, whatever is more popping, you will not have a lot of success. You have to have certain platforms or certain concepts of the platforms to which you kind of dedicate your time without jumping all around and giving up all of the previous platforms. As of this recording, in the year of our Lord 2022, I think that websites are still a major thing. They're still there. They're still important as they were when I was doing it back then. And they're not necessarily important as a great avenue for people to read your comic. In some cases, yes. Some cases, if you have a comic, you can create your website, and your website would be the primary or sometimes the only way to read your material, your comic. That is certainly still a good idea. However, where I see the point and the value of having a comic is that the thing with platforms, they're all owned by somebody or some organization or some company. They owned by somebody. So the platforms who host a lot of different users and their content, all of these platforms have their rules, have their regulations, and they also have certain algorithms, and they have certain way of how they operate. And because this platform does not belong to you, you can safely assume that this platform might change its rules anytime. They might have certain update, they might have certain change in policy, they might have they can do whatever the hell you want. Like, they can block you, they can block you by mistake, they can block you because somebody reported you, they can change the rules so they cannot post whatever you were posting. They can change formats, so your format, like of what you're creating, is not working really well. A lot of things can happen. So I feel like, as much as platforms are fantastic, you should have some space for your content for yourself. So certain space that is controlled by you, something like a website where you hold a domain, where you have an address, and you have it's your space. It updates as you want, and it presented the way you want, and it does what you want. So if any of the platforms that was one of your primary platforms goes down, or there is a change that create issues, you don't lose the kind of like the base of your operation. So you still have your website. Maybe like it doesn't pull as many views as the same material on other platforms, but it is your base. So nobody can take your base from you, but nobody can create a certain level of disruption. Sorry, this is what I want to say. Certain level of disruption for your presence online or for your comic presence online. That's why I recommend a website as of now. I don't know. I have a feeling. I don't know. I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the future? But so far, having a website, www.something.ca.com, whatever the hell, is a valuable thing in that sense. It's something that is Googleable, and somebody who, for example, doesn't know your handle on Instagram, doesn't use, for example, Instagram, if this is something that you're using, or YouTube, maybe these people don't use that, maybe those people don't know about these platforms, they don't care. But if they hear about your comic and they just go on Google, they for sure will find you on the website. Is a neutral platform that they can go to and potentially get access to any other platforms that you're using through your website, because you would want to have all the information on the website as well. So this side tangent, just talking about the website, I think they are important. For me personally, my website is not the epicenter of the views for my comic, not at all. It's the lowest views for my comic that I have in like areas of internet speaking, but I still would not let go of my website ever. Not like ever, but at this point I don't see why the hell would I do that. I still hold to it, and I feel like it's extremely important, and I think it would be not a smart idea on my part to get rid of it. So this is basically now back to the memory lane. So I was producing my comic on DeviantArt. I would post it on DeviantArt, I would post it on my website, and I would post it on the platforms that I was using at the time. I think I was posting a lot on Facebook, so I would do it on Facebook. I think I had a group on Facebook and I would post it there. But then I took hiatus from my comic because of the personal reasons of my life. Things were a little crazy at some point, so I took hiatus for 2 years. Back then I didn't know it was a hiatus. I thought I would never draw a comic again. I thought I would never draw again. It was a little dramatic on my part, but I've been going through things, and I had a little bit over not like identity crisis. It was not about my identity. I was going through things were happening in my life, and I didn't know, I just couldn't focus on my comic. I was just very unhappy. So it was weird times, but they were very important times as it turned out. Now that I'm working on my comic, I will talk about it later. But back then, I didn't know it was a hiatus. I thought that's it. Maybe drawing was not my thing, which is crazy for me to think about. I thought maybe my comic is not my thing. Anyhow, so I would not update anything on my platforms at this point. And I just went cold, basically. I wouldn't do anything. There was no special announcement. I just slowly, as hell in my life was progressing, I slowly kind of stopped updating things on my platforms, which were Facebook, DeviantArt, and my website. So as you can imagine what happened, because it was 2 years and it was pretty, not abrupt, but I guess all of a sudden, people didn't expect, like, it looked like comic gonna go on. It looked like I've been drawing my characters for a very long time, and now that I started to do a comic, and just give you a perspective of how far I was in my progress. So the comic, I did chapter 1 in black and white. Back then it was like a first try that I did chapter 2. Then I went back and redid chapter 1 in color, because chapter 2 I made it in color. So now I had a finished, complete, proper, like the final style. Chapter 1 in color, chapter 2. I started chapter 3, and then that's it. Maybe 12 pages in chapter. I think around that amount. My standard chapters are from 30 to 50 pages long, so kind of like a third of chapter 3. This is where it was over. To give you perspective right now, we're not really dipping in the story overall. I think if you talk in like a story structure terms, I guess there was inciting incident. It's like interesting. I would not say it is. I would not say we were in second act yet. We still were in first act. There were a couple inciting incidents during that time. We were still like in the half of first act, I would say, but I don't really like the story structure things, but just to give you an idea of like how it was progressing for the story. Now I am posting chapter 8, and I'm drawing the ending of chapter 9, and I already have chapter 10 sketched out. And we are deeply in, let's say, act 2, like we are third way through the first volume or the first arc of the story, I would say. So as you can see, I didn't go far with my comic at all back then. I kind of got people excited. It looked like I'm gonna go strong with that, but I didn't. So as you can imagine what happened, a lot of people just gave up on this. A lot of people assumed that I will not continue. So I lost quite a lot of readers there because of this. Also, what happened during this time is that DeviantArt lost kind of its presence online. A lot of things were starting to happen. Like, I don't want to make this video into like just history of DeviantArt, but a lot of things were happening on DeviantArt. People will leave in DeviantArt. Big artists would leave in DeviantArt. A lot of art on DeviantArt started slowly becoming, instead of like, there was a variety of things over there. There was anything, like a lot of things. Now as I look on DeviantArt, it's more like, I don't want to offend anybody, but I feel like more just amateur artists, way less professional artists. Before there was quite a serious presence of professional artists, people who are real industry professionals, who are earn good money with their art, who do covers for famous books, for artworks, for famous project, concept art for big companies. So these people were present on DeviantArt, but by the time I returned from my hiatus, those people were not there. DeviantArt was mostly the place for amateur artists to put the art that they're creating, and it also was place for a lot of, like, I think, fetish related art. This is what I immediately started noticing as I came back to the DeviantArt. Like, the quality of stuff in there dropped. So it was not anymore a hotspot for artists. It is now a very niche space. So that's kind of sad. There's almost no like replacement for something like a DeviantArt at this point, at least that I know of. That's a little sad, but this was the situation. And also, like, Facebook kind of changed, so it was more about people just posting their opinion. I guess it always was the case, but it was less. I think it was more art and more people presenting their work there, but now it was just opinion, sharing posts and of news, and I don't know, like just Facebook became something else. I don't know, like what was the last time that I posted on Facebook? I think years have gone by. So when I returned, I had to rebuild my kind of platforms. So I started posting, and not only that, the platforms that were my primary platforms changed. That's why kind of important of the website, like the platforms, they change. You cannot rely on a platform, and in sense of internet, you have to be willing to switch things out and be ready to kind of understand what's going on. You have to be ready to adapt, to change, to evolve, to try something new. You should kind of be willing to do this to a degree. So what happened with me, that platforms changed, and they changed not suddenly, they changed over time, but because I wasn't there for this key period of time where platforms were changing, I missed that. And there's also where was the moment where a lot of artists switched to Patreon and took their main fan audience to Patreon. I missed that as well. So a lot of my audience left my presence on DeviantArt. So by the time I came back, I could not pull people to Patreon because, first of all, a lot of people left already, and second, because I lost trust of my viewership, which is totally fair, because people who were following, they were thinking the story gonna go on, and the following, like they will continue follow the story, they will get to know what's happening. But the story was in the very beginning kind of like the pilot episode, two pilot episodes, let's say pilot episode, and the first second episode aired, and then nothing else. So obviously, and for 2 years, and nothing, like no update, no nothing at all, and obviously people gonna lose not trust, but like they're gonna lose interest, not in the sense that they're not interested anymore, but they just don't wanna be interested in that type of thing because they don't want to be disappointed again. So which is very fair. So as I came back, I had 2 problems to solve. I have to figure out the new platform that I need to use, or just figure out like at all what platforms to use, what to do, and also get back trust of the readership that I had originally. So my first strategy, again, I'm not sure, like I'm saying strategy, but it doesn't mean that this is the good strategy. It's just what I used at the time. First of all, I started continue posting on DeviantArt and trying to see how many people that I liked were there. Then I started an Instagram that was in general my art Instagram, where I started kind of like building up the portfolio on Instagram with the artwork that I already had, because I didn't have an art Instagram. I had my personal Instagram, and then I started to create my just art Instagram in general, and I started posting things there in hopes that I will just create audience over there in general. And from there on, kind of like repeat the same thing that I did with DeviantArt, when I would create an audience who like my fantasy art, standalone art, and then I would create an audience for my comic book from that art as well. That was basically, I was just trying to repeat the same strategy, and it worked to a degree that my Instagram got decent following as well. I was able to grow this, and maybe I should have another video about how to grow platforms. But again, I don't think I'm a specialist. Like my platforms, I have certain platforms that are doing good, certain platforms that are growing, certain platforms that picked in good stats, but other platforms I don't have a good presence. So I'm not sure I'm a good person to tell you about how to grow a platform, since I didn't do it well yet across the board. But overall, my Instagram was doing decent. It would have decent following. So I started posting some things from my comics over there, and it didn't quite work on Instagram as well. I think because Instagram is a little bit different than DeviantArt. People spend a little bit less time on Instagram when they're looking at the post. They want something that they want right away, and if it's not that, why follow that? Like, it's not like, I think DeviantArt had a more slow pace, and you would see, oh, this is their work, what else do they do? But on Instagram, it's either what they want or they don't want it. So when I was posting fantasy art and then I switched to the comic, it's kind of like the same thing that happened with DeviantArt when I did that, when people were like, it's not necessarily what I subscribed for, happened, but on a little bit more, not bigger scale, but it was more obvious that like the likes would go down, and I guess maybe then the views would go down on later posts that this was a comic. And then what also happened is that I guess Instagram's own algorithm would also take it into consideration that all of a sudden people are not interested in my content, and it would start pushing my content way less as well. And then what I try to do is just post panels from my comic that look like a standalone art, so I can get like the same type of material, like the same kind of style of content out. But then I would tell people to go to the link in the bio, whatever, or I would just add the swipe up thing to my Insta stories so that people can go and look at the website. But people were not doing that because I never told people to do that. That's another thing with the platforms. It's kind of like, as you create your platform, what is important is that you want to establish certain logic of how this platform operates. It's not necessarily when people go to Instagram, you shouldn't assume people to be it's like if Instagram has this type of tools and this types of content options, you shouldn't assume that it means that your viewers all familiar with all sorts of content types of Instagram and only use it all equally. So for example, if you built your Instagram on posts alone and now all of a sudden you become more of a real person, again, you might lose your audience, or the audience will not just even notice that you do reels, they would not care. Or if you do a lot of stories, a lot of Instagram lives, for example, and then you start doing more posts, people might not be even notice, or Instagram would not even push the new type of the content. So, and if what I did, I switched to the type of the content as I was providing, hey, listen, this is kind of like a preview, but if you're going to see the whole story, this is the link. I started doing it all of a sudden. I didn't kind of give this idea to people early on that what I have here is just a part of my work and you can get more. I didn't set up this idea well enough. So when I introduced it, I'm assuming people were not really interested in doing that. It was extra work for them. So this is like, content is very interesting. Even though you're providing something for free, the way people consume your content or the time that people give you to your content is still kind of like the work that they do. It's the attention span that they give to you, is the time of the day that they give to you. So you have to kind of make it less inconvenient for them, because there's so much content out there and it's all so accessible and so free. So for me, that kind of logic didn't really work. Even though I had a good following on that Instagram, I didn't get a good following for my comic in the end. So that kind of didn't work. But I started gaining back my following on DeviantArt slowly but surely. So I started, after this following started growing on DeviantArt, I started implementing links to DeviantArt. So now I started building my Patreon, again, like something that other wise artists did while I was on hiatus, hating my life. So I started kind of doing this pipeline thing where I would, now that I have established audience, I start slowly introducing a little bit of link, up to the point where I have certain link under every page I post, and I have it on my main page, so people know kind of where to find me if they want more. So it's like, it's a common knowledge now, this is coming here, but if you want, there's this and that. And then I started experimenting with new type of the content. And it's, so what I'm thinking, the type of content that not content, kind of like a media or a platform that you use to put your comic out there, it can be used in two ways, directly or indirectly. So you can directly create a platform to promote specifically your comic, something that you just say, hey, this is my comic platform, I post my comic here. Or you can create a platform that is indirectly promoting your comic or indirectly showing your comic, like something that I have on YouTube or here, where you clearly talking about it. So you're providing some extra type of content, extra type of value for people. However, while you're providing that, this content kind of based on your comics. So people who interested in this content and want to check out your comic, they are able to find it. So it's kind of like betting on different platforms and trying to see which platform will take off, but then linking all of these different platforms content wise to your comic. So for me, indirectly, it's YouTube and this podcast, let's say, and I'm assuming I can say my just standard Instagram, where I would, like my art Instagram, where I would post things. So because there I clearly create art, it's kind of like the same that I did on DeviantArt. I clearly create art that is based on certain characters, on certain stories. So if you're interested in more, you can, but if you're not, it's fine. It's content that can stand on its own, no problem, or at least it puts my name out there. So from there on, I started creating YouTube and Patreon and started producing and building content there, and slowly growing these platforms as well. Also, with the type of the content that I'm doing, this is just an overall kind of my personal recommendation. Don't do content that you think is something that people want. Do content that you do want to do, because I think overall success of platform really depends on how able you are to continue this platform, to continue working on this platform and continue putting content on this platform. If you create platform with the idea, okay, let's create it and see if it's gonna be popular. Let's see if this type of content will bring views and I can redirect people to my comic. This type of thing is popping. This type of thing is popular right now. Let's do this. It probably will work. It might. It also might not work. But if it does work, what it will create is that kind of, basically, I was talking through this whole episode so far, is that you might find that then you will be stuck with this content, because if you switch the content, people will not be interested and they will leave. So if you are repeating repeating content of someone else's content that is popular, or if you think that something is popular and you're doing content that's why, so it's something that you will most likely lose interest of doing later on, because it's not necessarily something that you wanted to do. It's something that you just did to get views. Tactics of creating something that you think is popular, getting views, and then doing with these views what you want and just giving people what you actually want to do doesn't always work. A lot of people will not appreciate that. People are very simple. The content that you show, they subscribe because they want more content like this. If you give different content, they will unsubscribe, or they will stay if you give the same type of content. So this is something to keep in mind. So my personal advice, if you're creating the type of content around your comic to promote your comic, make sure this content is something that you do honestly like doing, because otherwise you cannot sustain it. And it doesn't matter how many people subscribe with something that you did that is popular. If you cannot sustain it, those views on this popularity and certain video or something going viral will not help you and will not do things for you. So from there, let's go to Instagram, because again, I was thinking about different platforms, things that I can do where I can directly post my comic, kind of something like a DeviantArt, when I can actually post my comic and reach my audience while posting directly, while it's not being my website. Or so I wanted some platform that is big. I tried Pinterest, it didn't work. I trust I don't know. Yeah, I think Pinterest was something that I tried, because Tumblr is obviously dead. Facebook is obviously not for that. I mean, it is for some people, but I just don't think that my demographic, I don't know, maybe, but I just don't feel like it. It's another point that I want to bring up, is that use your intuition as well and use your personal level of comfort. You should be enjoying the platform. If you don't like the platform, it's the same time with the content. If this content is not something that you want to produce long term, you will not, and it will not work because you're not committing to that. Actually, maybe at this point I should talk about Webtoons and Topaz. So these are two websites that are famous because they are online comic websites. So I actually didn't post too much on Topaz. Maybe I should actually pick it up, but I didn't have a lot of views there. I actually had more views right away on Webtoons. So I was kind of encouraged to do that. But I was kind of lukewarm about both of them. So I just continued with the one that did give me views. But then, okay, let's talk about Webtoons for a little bit. I know that this is a hub for webcomics, and I was thinking, okay, that's perfect. I have to find the media that is specifically designed for webcomics. So all the people who want to read webcomics, they go there. So it makes sense that this should be my platform number one. For some reason, and I'm not there's some reason that I can explain, some reason that I cannot, is that Webtoons is just not quite working for me. There's a couple things that are not working. First of all, maybe it's like an ego thing. I feel like I see my comic a little bit different as just a web comic. I feel that I just see my comic as just the comic. It's just my story. I don't know. I feel like when I go to Webtoons, I feel like what I create is a little different than just the standard pace of the web comic. My story is a little bit more, feels like a graphic novel. It has a novel pace type of thing. It's more, I think, my belief, it's more feels like literature. So because comic is kind of like in between of the literature and painting. So I feel my comic is more deeply in the level of literature. And I'm not saying that in order to say, oh, literature, like the real books are just so much smarter than the comics. They suck and they're stupid. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's just, I do love web comics and I do love reading them. There's quite a lot that I read, but I just feel that my particular comic is not necessarily having the same vibes or pacing or just feel than the standard webcomic is. So I feel I just come there and I just feel like I stand out, but not in a good way. Like, who's that guy? Like, kind of weird. Like, people. I just have a feeling that my comic is a little bit doesn't belong. I don't know. It's just weird. I don't know. It's that very first ambiguous point. Second ambiguous point is just the way Webtoons is structured. So when you post your comic, you're supposed to scroll it. If you just scroll down, this is how you read it, like one internal strip. My comic is not designed this way. My comic is designed to be page by page. You kind of flip the pages type of idea. So every time I have to post there, I have to really go in Photoshop and redo my pages. I have to really restyle, draw certain things for my pages. I have to change them a little bit to post there. And this is a lot of time and it's time consuming. I'm already consuming quite a lot of time drawing my pages as is, and it feels weird that I have to spend time to just post something on the platform, just actually tailor my comic to the platform. I don't like tailoring my things to the platform. That's just to the degree, like on Instagram, obviously there's a crop on Instagram, like you cannot have very long images, you have to keep it in mind. But like, come on, if I have to go and really redraw my pages, restructure my pages, that just pisses me off. It feels like I don't like to change my stuff for the platform. Like, what? It's kind of like platform is asking me to create a customized thing for it. I'm doing my stuff. I'm the queen of my comic. You don't tell me. Platform doesn't get to tell me how to draw my comic. Are you kidding me? So it's almost like this weird petty resentment that I have. Another thing that I have with Webtoons is that the way they promote things. So in Webtoons, you have certain titles that are featured. So they have kind of, I believe, in exclusive deal with Webtoons. So if they're featured, Webtoons promotes them. And so they are front and center. You can read them on Webtoons. And they're very visible. They can pull amazing views just because Webtoons will promote them. But they're also exclusive to Webtoons. So for me, I never want my comic to be exclusive to any platforms. Are you kidding me? So my comic belongs to me, just me, and that's it. Platforms, they just get the privilege of posting my things, but they absolutely don't get any exclusivity on my things. Absolutely not. Again, from the perspective that I think platforms come and go, they change, they evolve or degrade. Doesn't matter. I don't want my comic to be trapped in that. So to me, being exclusive to some platform is like the horrors of all horrors. I don't want that. So then it leaves me in a very weird state. So they have, like, I think featured, and they have discover levels. So discover is like anyone else. You can do whatever you want. You can post, but they don't promote you as well. You're not visible. It's just people have to find you a certain way. And I guess if you get certain level of success or visibility or views, this is where you can strike this deal with Webtoons, or Webtoons would, Webtoon, is it Z or no Z? I don't know, will offer you to be featured. So to me, it's almost like nothing to strive for. It's almost like if you get big views, that's what happens. But what happens when you get big views is what I don't want to happen. So it's almost like no motivation. It's like, what's the point to get big views there if I don't even want to get that? Like, I don't know. So that one, and the comments. It's hard to see comments and hard to see replies to comments. And to me, it's my biggest favorite thing is to read comics from people who read my story. Did I say comics? Sorry. Read comments from people who read my story. This is the most favorite thing. And on Webtoons, you don't get notifications. You have to really go through different you actually have to go and open chapters that you posted and scroll yourself and see if you have comments. You don't have like a directory where you can see comments. For some reason, when you go to the comment, to the like a section where you read comments, you only see your own replies to the comments. It's just weird. And I don't like this. Like, again, like, why? It's so much work to get what I want. Like, the only thing I want when I post my comic is to see comments from people, and I can't. Like, that's it. Basically, I have gripe with that. So it's just the subject of like, if the platform doesn't work for you, if the platform works against how you want to work with the platform, you don't have to use that. You don't have to choose this platform. So what I did, I started brand new Instagram that is 100% my comic related. I only post my comic pages and I only have comic content from there. So, and that seems to work better. So I started doing, again, I'm sure it's like borderline of how to promote your platform. But what I started doing when I started this just new Instagram that I called the like book_of_contradictions. I believe it's just called as the comic, the book contradictions. So it's very on brand, everything. So the first thing that I did, and I would post a page per day, every day, till I ran out of the pages that were already out. So I think it created pretty decent momentum for the readership. So that Instagram started growing pretty decently, and I feel like Instagram algorithm really likes it. And then at this point, whoever came there, they are there for my comic. They like my comic because the whole thing is about my comic. If they subscribe, it means they like my comic. So I started getting following from there that is pretty healthy and doing good. So that seems like I found this platform for now that I appreciate. Recently, I started testing kind of comic content with Instagram Reels and TikTok. So this is like a new thing that I started trying and seeing if I can do. But I think it naturally came out of the fact that I already do YouTube videos, so I'm familiar with the idea of filming whatever you're drawing and getting kind of like advice things. And it's not my original idea. This is what happens when, what I like doing on Instagram, I like to subscribe to shit tons of people, like buttloads, like thousands. I like to follow thousands of people for Instagrams like my comic or for my art, because I get exposed to a lot of material and it helps me to understand what people are doing, what people are interested in, and what's up, what's good in the hood, basically. And I start seeing how people are doing reels, how people are utilizing stories, how people are utilizing live streaming, and just this gives me idea of what's popping. This gives me idea of people are interested, and this gives me idea of how people want to see it. So I kind of like the format, just observing how other fellow artists were doing that, like massive amount of them, and even like professional, amateur, it doesn't matter. I get an idea of how I want to do my Instagram Reels or my TikTok. I tried TikTok. I don't necessarily like TikTok. I feel like TikTok, the material that is popping on TikTok for some reason is very weird. I tested different stuff there, and my art one doesn't work unless it's all about like crazy show and presentation, just loud music and kind of shallow. And I'm not interested in producing this type of content. And the type of content that I have that is popping there is just random content that I did, and I just don't like the point of it. So I feel like stuff that again, it's kind of a combination of what you want to create. Stuff that I do want to create doesn't pop on TikTok, and I would post the same videos on TikTok and Instagram Reels and see what will happen. And I get like literally 10,000 views on Instagram Reels, and I get 2 views on TikTok. I'm not joking. That's actually, if you look, let's actually look really at my Instagram Reels views to give an idea. Just first 4. Let's see, last four videos that I posted. It's 9,000, 2,000, 11,000, 5,000, 8,000, 6,000. views. It was six of them. Now let's look at the TikTok and see if we have something different there. So on TikTok, it's 2 views, 4 views, 5 views, 1 view, 6 views. So it's very weird. I'm not sure it's the same content. It's just wild how differently it performs. So now basically this is something that I'm experimenting with, creating these reels, but all my reels are all about kind of the in line with my comic, my YouTube, and my podcast. They're all about like what I'm talking with you here, what I'm talking about YouTube, just different, tailored for different format, kind of like 30-second step of talk. I'm showing my comic, I'm giving advice, I'm showing tips, and doing some previews. Like I'm letting people know something interesting about the comic and using my own comic as an example of some tools that I'm sharing. So I feel like now why things started to really work decently for me is because I have the concept of a brand. And this whole idea of a brand, I think, is extremely important for the success. And the branding is not, it shouldn't be something that you necessarily go and think about and then decide specifically what would be the best brand and what not. Branding is all about, I think, figuring out what you're naturally already doing, figuring out the combination of what are you naturally already creating and you want to promote, what's the content that you want to promote. I'm assuming in this case of this podcast, it's your comic. So what is your comic and what other sort of a content that might support your comic you're interested to produce if you are. If you're not, then just the comic is your brand. And whatever other content you create, like whatever something supportive material, promotion material, like or anything that you put out on different platforms, it should match the brand of your comic. Should be this, like people should see it on different platforms and know what it is. I think for me, why now things are going pretty decently well is that I started to have certain brands. So I have my comic, and I also have this kind of like a side idea of I'm just giving advices on how to make comics, of how to draw and how to write and how to be an artist, but mostly more narrowed, especially on Instagram, of like how to make comic, small like tips about that. So I feel this is pretty decent pack for a brand, and people know what to expect, people know what I do, and it started working together, and all different sides of the content that I'm creating start supporting each other. So this is at least my path. And I think another important thing for the branding that you do, it's not always about what you include. I think a big part about brand is what you do not include. I feel like different things that you do overall in general in life is not necessarily should be content for your brand. The brand should be narrowed and clearly understood. So for me, I do comics and I give advice how to do comics based on my own comic. It's a fantasy comic drawn in Photoshop. So digital art comic, digitally drawn comic, advices on how to digitally draw comic and write it. So it's pretty understandable, but I don't put other things, on my portfolio of me as a Christina, on there, because it would be confusing. Because if I say, put everything, a little bit of everything there, if I say, hey, I draw comics, I'm also a photographer, I'm also a videographer, I also I'm a writer, like matches up with the comic obviously, but I also VFX artist, I do matte painting for movies, I work on TV shows and feature films, I also do branding for my company, I do graphic design, and I don't do that because that would be confusing. It's like, oh my god, like you don't know what you're getting, and that's a very low percentage of people who would be interested in all of that, unless it's like brand and cult of Christina is a thing, which I would not want that. So it has to be a narrow of what I do. So important thing about branding your idea, like branding your content, is I think more important is what you not include rather than you include. It should be like literally 1 or 2 things that you do include, and this is the package for your brand. So yeah, and I think the combination of just finding the platform that you do like, finding the platform that does serve your content, the platform that is a good idea for your content to be in, because the concept of the platform matches it. Because for Instagram, it's great because Instagram is really visual. People want to look at things. People not really want to read things. People want to just see the picture, move on, see the picture, see more pictures, like that. That's what Instagram is all about, and kind of like putting pictures in there, like comics as a set of pictures. It's a great idea. I think it works great. So That's why this platform does work. And also the platform, as I said, that you like using, that you enjoy using, that works for you. However, also having your own presence, independent presence on the internet, like having a website, having a Patreon is still a platform, but it gives you some sort of a independence and your own space is good. So at least for me, just to summarize this very long talk, this is maybe the longest episode of the podcast that I've ever had. To summarize that is, find the platform that you do enjoy, that matches the type of the content that you have, and the platform that you like using. Also the platform whose algorithm does work well with what you're putting out. Also, choose more than one platform. Have one or two main platforms and maybe have one supportive platform. So it's a healthy combination, and it's like a certain distribution. Don't spread yourself out across different platforms. Again, narrow yourself down to the platforms that you do enjoy using, and when you have your viewership, and use these platforms, create a brand. Also using these platforms, there should be a recognizable brand of what you're presenting. For example, of your comic, if you're creating just your comic, so your comic as its own entity is recognized and clear and stands out on these platforms. So people who find you on another platform, they know, kind of like will recognize you in another platform as well. It's obviously good to have stuff like same names and whatnot. Probably should have another branding topic on its own, honestly, but having a clear brand, and also having, I think, a good idea to have, if you're interested in this, a payment present on the like on the internet as well. If people want to pay extra for your extra material, if you want to do like earn money with your comic, so something like a Patreon or something like a web shop where people can buy something, or the links to Amazon when you're selling something on Etsy, when people can buy whatever the extras, perks, or like physical copies or whatever of your comic, extra material, premium stuff. Having this and having an independent presence on the internet with your own website that you should keep ideally no matter what. And I would suggest your website should be feel like the base of your, let's say, the base present of your comic. It doesn't have to be the best one, not like the best one, but like the most vibrant, the coolest one, the where it's at. Think about it as, the capital of your little domain. Let's think, your website is at Washington, right? It's relatively quiet city, but this is where administration is happening. But let's say your Instagram is your New York, and your YouTube is Los Angeles. This is where like fun happening. I don't know, like a lot of destination for huge volumes of people that are coming in, and giving you all the views. So it's actually, I think this analogy is kind of working. So that would be the episode for today. It's kind of long, but I don't know. Hopefully this was interesting content for you. I probably will come back with talking about branding and all this stuff in some later episodes, because I have things to say, because I am indeed, I'm a brand designer for my company. I do VFX for them, and I'm a brand designer. See, even I'm spread out everywhere, even in my day job. I have different jobs on my day job. Crazy days. So thank you so much, guys, for watching. I hope you're having a good day, and I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you so much, guys. Bye.